Daniel chapter 6. Kingship, Justice, and Monotheism. The experience, eminence, and integrity of Daniel were recognized by Darius the Mede, who made him first president over the 120 princes who governed his kingdom. This occasioned no small jealousy. As Joseph Parker has observed, with reference to this passage, all primacy has to be paid for. If that primacy is as faithful and righteous a one as Daniel's, it must be doubly paid for. The levelling demands of evil are for a democracy of being, a cosmic democracy in which all distinctions are nullified in favour of a commonality which blurs identity, responsibility, and meaning. Evil men seek to make all things evil. Men who are failures demand a universal failure. And men who are unable or unwilling to rise above their low estate seek savagely to raise all eminence into a common democracy of mediocrity and defeat. Democracy is the great love of the failures and cowards of life, and involves a hatred of differences, because freedom is inseparable from differences, distinctions, discernment, and wise discrimination. But freedom is an enemy to those who hate responsibility and accordingly must be destroyed as an aristocratic principle to make way for the, quote, freedom, end quote, of total democracy, which is the end of all meanings, discriminations and divisions, whether good or bad, in the name of this higher virtue, the mystical oneness and absorption into the mass of a fallen and corrupt humanity. All primacy has to be paid for, either by total war against a hostile world, or by radical concession and submission to that world. Religiously and politically, Daniel refused to concede in any measure. His one vulnerable point, his political enemies concluded, was his religious faith. Accordingly, Darius was persuaded to issue an interdict that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Chapter 6, verse 7. This decree, once issued, could not be reversed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Chapter 6, verse 8. Several very important political religious beliefs come to focus here, all considerations of continuing relevancy and importance. 1. The priestly kingship of the monarch is here manifested in a particularly highly developed conception thereof. The priest-king was the mediator between God and man, the link between heaven and earth, a living Tower of Babel, and the point of continuity between the two worlds. Accordingly, the good life was possible only in terms of that order manifested in and through that sacred link, apart from whom no true order existed. To ask a petition through the king as mediator, to pray in his name as Christians now pray in Jesus' name, was thus to give witness to the cornerstone of society and the fundamental fact of life. 3. The fundamental law of all being was expressed in and through the mediator king, that is, in his official interdicts or ex cathedra utterances. These laws were indeed in terms of concrete historical situations, but were nonetheless fundamental law as related to history, and hence unalterable. 4. The priest-king was thus the focal point of heaven and earth, and the voice of law, and law incarnate, and yet, in a very real sense, under law, bound by his own utterances and helpless to reverse them, as both Daniel chapter 6 verse 14 following and Esther chapter 1 verse 19 and chapter 8 verse 8 testify. To this position of the Medo-Persian monarchs, secular history gives no small confirmation. Diodorus Siculus reported the inability of Darius III to revoke his hasty death sentence on Charidemos. Quintus Curtius reported, the Persians worshipped their kings among the gods. Plutarch recorded a similar report in his Themistocles, quoting Artabanus to Themistocles, who sought audience with Xerxes. O stranger, the laws of men are different, and one thing is honourable to one man, and to others another. But it is honourable for all to honour and observe their own laws. It is the habit of the Greeks, we are told, to honour, above all things, liberty and equality. But amongst our many excellent laws, we account this the most excellent, to honour the king, and to worship him as the image of the great preserver of the universe. If then you shall contest to our laws, and fall down before the king and worship him, you may both see him and speak to him. But if your mind be otherwise, you must make use of others to intercede for you, for it is not the national custom here for the king to give audience to anyone that doth not fall down before him. Such a concept was by no means limited to the Persians. The Greeks deified their city-states, and saw the polis as itself the locale of deity, so that their, quote, democracy, end quote, was a democracy of gods. This concept of true order and divine mediation is the inevitable concomitant of every social theory, including those that deny the supernatural, or deny even the concept of truth in favour of relativity or pragmatism. For democracy, the voice of the people is the voice of God. Vox populi, vox Dei. For Marxism, the dictatorship of the proletariat is history come to incarnate focus. And pragmatism, for all its claims to anti-metaphysical thinking, is based on a series of a priori assumptions concerning the nature and destiny of man, which are staggering acts of faith. There is no social theory without its, quote, voice of law, end quote, its great mediator and link between process and reality, between time and eternity, between history and the end of time order, between God and man. Churches, governments, schools and philosophies all proffer links, mediators and voices of law, and whether they admit the reality of God or not, seek to temporalize eternity and thereby give meaning, purpose and direction to time and history. Each will grant toleration to the other, provided its prior claim to truth be recognized. Worship God, but first bow down to the state as the true order of man. Religion, private experience and learning can be tolerated only as long as the primacy of the democratic order be admitted. Each philosophy, church, or political order is insistent on this point. I am the door, the true order is unattainable apart from me. Against all this, Christ spoke as the one true mediator, the bond of heaven and earth by his incarnation, but a union without confusion of the two natures, so that God remains God and man remains man. In declaring himself to be the one and true door, Jesus declared that all who sought entrance into the kingdom, into the fulfillment of man and of history, by any other door than he, were thieves and robbers who sought the death of man and the destruction of all order. John chapter 10. God and man must be brought together if man and history are to be saved and fulfilled, but without confusion. For that temptation to confusion is the satanic temptation. Ye shall be as God. Genesis chapter 3 verse 5, Revised Version. This confusion means the destruction of history and of man. It means the attempt to eternalize time and process, and to negate the fact of creation and the necessity of growth, development and maturation. It means the end of time and the end of the meaning of time. The cultural pyramid builders of every generation seek to arrest process and decay and to eternalize their real or dream orders, but vainly, for the confusion is an impossibility and the attempt is confounded by God-ordained confusion. Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 to 9. In Christ, the two orders, time and eternity, God and man, are brought together, incarnated, but without confusion, so that history's redemption is made possible, man's salvation effected, and the integrity of time preserved. The Council of Chalcedon, in recognizing this fact, gave to Western history its basis of freedom. The attempt to function as process in time, and not all the medieval and modern attempts at arresting time, have succeeded in negating that victory. Chalcedon, AD 451, declared in part that this one and the same Christ is Son, Lord, only begotten, recognized in two natures, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. The distinction of natures being in no way annulled by the union, but rather the characteristics of each nature being preserved and coming together to form one person and subsistence, not as parted or separated into two persons, but one and the same Son and only begotten God the Word, Lord Jesus Christ, even as the prophets from earliest times spoke of him, and our Lord Jesus Christ himself taught us, and the creed of the fathers has handed down to us. The devices whereby men have sought to achieve that false bond of heaven and earth are not only institutional, but also experiential, as witness asceticism and mysticism. Thus, Polycarp Sherwood, OSB, STD, in analysing St. Maximus the Confessor, has written, "Deification is the ultimate fulfilling of human nature's capacity for God. Deification and salvation are the same. Whether in experience, person, office, or institution, the goal is a bond of time and eternity, the representation or manifestation of the image of the great preserver of the universe, so that man might escape from time, or that history might be arrested by that manifested order." Daniel, however, refused to be swayed into fear or compromise by the law of Darius. Indeed, his reaction to the decree which he recognized as aimed at him was prayer. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Chapter 6, verse 10. Not in Babylon was Daniel's mediator, but in ruined Jerusalem, in the temple, typically, in that altar wherein Christ and his sacrifice had been ritually set forth. The impossibility of the temple of Jerusalem, as indeed the house of God, that is, to contain him, Solomon had declared at its dedication, at which time also the temple's typical significance was hinted at in this indication that both Israelite and foreigner prayed toward this place. 1 Kings chapter 8. Apparently, the enemies of Daniel had at least one informer in his household to enable them to secure his arrest and conviction, because this private practice was conclusively proven in a public hearing before Darius, to the consternation of that monarch. Darius was now bound by his own law to sentence to death his most trusted associate and chief president. His grief and agony are unmistakable, and his position a tragic one. As the voice of law, he could not deny himself without ceasing to be that bond of heaven and earth. His office and power required, whatever vice he might indulge in, this one unswerving allegiance to law. Thus Darius's law said death to Daniel, while his love said life, and the two could not be united. In every non-biblical system of thought, this conflict appears in some form, the irreconcilable and unbridgeable conflict and gulf between law and love. Let law triumph, and its harshness turns it ultimately into a cold scheme of organized injustice. Let love triumph over law, and again injustice holds sway as antinomianism infects every bulwark of order. The tension between law and love is thus a continuing tension that works to the dissolution of one civilization after another, and is today basic to much contemporary tension as humanitarian impulses seek to override the requirements of strict justice and the dictates of its law. The tension is by no means limited to the political order, but is endemic to the family, society, school, and every other order. Only in the biblical revelation is the tension between law and love resolved, with vast social and historical implications in the person and work of Jesus Christ. By his perfect righteousness and his vicarious atonement, the strictest requirements of law and justice were fully met and fulfilled, and the statutes of God observed to every jot and tittle, and yet, at one and the same time, the love of God unto salvation was manifested in and through him. The cross, thus, is the symbol of the unity of law and love in Jesus Christ, and of the full requirement and mutual integrity of both. The radical injustice of every order apart from Christ is overcome by the synthesis and the historical realization of an order founded on this unity, as yet unrealized, is opened up. The attempts of men to create an equitable and livable order apart from the atonement have been doomed to radical collapse, as witnessed Julius Caesar's attempt to supplant the failing law with his graceless clementia. Love or forgiveness, which is unable to regenerate man, becomes only a license to and subsidy of evil, and law itself is equally incapable of any creative role or regenerating function. Darius, caught by this tension, could only cry out, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God able?" Chapter 6, verse 20. And Daniel, out of the depths of the lion's den, was able to declare that God had that night stopped the mouths of the lions and delivered him without any hurt. The overjoyed king restored Daniel to his position and sentenced his adversaries and their families, an injustice forbidden in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 16, 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 6, to that same death they had planned for Daniel. The decree of Darius, chapter 6, verses 25 to 29, while commemorative in purpose and self-condemnatory with reference to this living God of Daniel, recognizes his omnipotence and sovereignty clearly and plainly. But, lacking as it is in a personal relationship to that God, and without any sense of man as sinner, it is not a confession of faith, but an acknowledgement of power. This Darius could believe, and by honouring Daniel further and attaching him more closely to his throne, as did Cyrus, chapter 6, verse 28, Darius sought to strengthen his own throne as a living bond between heaven and earth. Polytheism was not necessarily overcome. Indeed, the multiplicity of man, his cultures and powers, was seen as the counterpart of the multiplicity of the supernatural order. The unification of the one order, that of man, under a great priest-king, meant also the coalescence of the supernatural order in and through that one and same divine human link, the great priest-king. Accordingly, as the great empires of antiquity developed and expanded, they were characterized by a double note. First, a cultural synthesis and amalgamation, and second, a religious syncretism, as the various gods and faiths were brought to focus in and through the ritual bond of heaven and earth. Monotheism was thus a development of empire and an aspect of its concept of unity. Monotheism is historically and essentially a close relative to polytheism and an aspect of the same basic philosophy. At first glance, this seems a radical contradiction, in that polytheism is, as the word indicates, a belief in many gods, and monotheism is a belief in one God. But polytheism is not only a belief in many gods, but also and essentially a belief that God is many. That is, that he is various in his forms and appearances, often in contradiction one to another, so that he is one in being, although as unlimited in the diversity of his nature as his nature. Thus, polytheism and henotheism are closely linked historically. In henotheism, many gods are recognized, and each is, for the moment, worshipped as a concentration of all the attributes of deity. Accordingly, we find, together with polytheism, a henotheistic identification, so that Astarte and Chemosh are closely linked or identified, although radically different. Jupiter and Zeus are easily merged, and the whole pantheon of gods seen as diverse aspects of the diversity of being. In periods of competing and warring states, the polytheistic aspect was paramount, whereas imperialism emphasized henotheism and monotheism. It is important to also note that modern philosophical and religious monotheism, by recognizing the, quote, truth, end quote, in or of all religions, is strongly henotheistic and only a step removed from polytheism. Rome moved from polytheism to monotheism and henotheism as it developed from republic to empire. Its religious policy enabled it to utilize fully every local faith while doing it honor and link it also to the empire and emperor. Thus, some of the most foreign of cities were also the most devout adherents to the emperor cult without any departure from their local cults, as witnessed Smyrna and Pergamos. The unity of empire went hand in hand with henotheism and monotheism, and these two led directly to the undergirding of the central Roman concept, law. Basic to this development was the Roman concept of natural law, which was jus gentium, the law of foreigners or law of nations, the legal analogue to religious henotheism. Foreign laws were absorbed by Rome, as were foreign cults, into the monotheism of the state. But legal henotheism and monotheism were as alien to biblical faith as religious henotheism. The Bible is neither henotheistic nor monotheistic, but rather Trinitarian and theistic, and its supernatural conception of law makes invalid both Roman civil law and the law of nations. Rome's opposition to Christianity was thus grounded on more insight than was the compromising work of many Christian apologists. The same tension exists today. A faith which puts African polytheism, Spinozist's pantheism, Unitarian monotheism, and Toynbee's modified henotheism all on an equal level as error is a cardinal offence to imperial man, whose empire must be all-inclusive and whose conception of truth and power is often closely linked with geographical extent and political-religious inclusivism. Henotheism and monotheism, as aspects of one faith, are of the nature of empire as man develops it, and an aspect of the being of the state. In terms of this, the Roman Empire could tolerate a diversity of faiths as long as their oneness, in essence, was recognized, and as long as the cult of the emperor as the focus of and bridge between heaven and earth was maintained. Christianity, biblical faith, was therefore doubly offensive because, first, it proclaimed another, an exclusive mediator, Jesus Christ, and second, it seemed peculiarly and hostilely polytheistic by comparison to the deism which underlay all pagan polytheisms. The Greek and Roman believers and thinkers were not crude polytheists, but sophisticated deists. The triune God was a standing offence in that his self-sufficiency was so patent. He provided his own mediator or link and his own spirit, as against man's mediation, aspiration, and assent. The ontological Trinity, himself the fundamental principle of unity and multiplicity, creator, redeemer, and sustainer, undercut the autonomy of man and his religious effort and rendered all the magnificence of empire vain in its effort to bring fulfillment to man and society and create the ultimate order. Accordingly, Arianism, subordinationism, Monophysitism, Nestorianism, and other heresies, and occasionally even Judaism, as with the Khazar kingdom, became men's futile refuges from the juggernaut of the triune God in its full-orbed and co-equal power, destroying as it did the claims of empire and religion to be the divine human links and bonds. The kingship and priesthood of Christ undercut human kings and priests, and the finality of his office as prophet meant the end of religion as a creative and independent agency. All were now required to be ministerial or else criminal. Progressively, therefore, as the issue has come into focus, the patronage of true Christianity has been less and less possible for the state. The ease with which Darius paid tribute to God becomes less and less practicable to men whose mediator and God is the state. In this respect, Soviet Russia manifests a higher degree of epistemological self-consciousness than those states able as yet to pay hypocritical tribute to God, whom they, in reality, war against. This hypocrisy was not present in Darius, in that the fundamental tension was not yet in focus. The tension of our era is witness to the existence of the problem, and is thus a forerunner of its solution.